It still sounds fake when I say it out loud, like a plot twist in a rom-com written by someone with a grudge, but it's real. It happened. And it all started the morning I woke up alone in our bed, expecting pancakes and flowers, and instead found a post-it note that said, "Don't wait up. Pi." We'd been married for 6 years. I thought I knew him. I thought we were past games. But apparently, humiliation was his new love language. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at that stupid yellow square, trying to decide if I was supposed to laugh. He always said I took things too seriously. Maybe this was one of his weird pranks, his way of being playful. But the ache in my chest wasn't playful. It was hollow. The truth didn't hit all at once. It came in waves. When I saw the untouched reservation email for the dinner I had planned, the unanswered texts, the silence that stretched into the afternoon. He didn't call, didn't message, just vanished. On my birthday, friends started texting, asking where we were celebrating. I lied, said he had something special planned, said I was getting ready. Meanwhile, I sat in the kitchen, still in my robe, eating cereal out of the box and trying not to cry into the milk. Around 8 p.m., I finally caved and called him, straight to voicemail. No explanation, no excuse, just nothing. I waited up all night, telling myself it had to be some elaborate surprise, that he'd come home laughing, holding cake or flowers or something to justify the pain. He didn't. He stumbled in the next morning, reeking of alcohol and smugness, said, "Relax, it was a joke. You're so sensitive." Like abandoning your wife on her birthday was just harmless fun. Like I should have laughed along. That was the moment I stopped being the woman who waits. That was the last day I let someone laugh at my pain and call it love. We met when I was 24, and hungry for stability. He was charming in a rehearsed way, the kind of man who always knew the right words, but never quite meant them. Back then, I didn't know how to tell the difference. I just knew it felt good to be chosen. His name was Kevin. He was older by 6 years, already working in real estate, already talking about investments and credit scores and building a future. I was still figuring out who I was. He made me feel like I didn't need to, like all I had to do was slide into the life he'd already built. At first, it felt like love. He opened doors, remembered my coffee order, sent flowers, just because. But looking back, I realized he wasn't loving me. He was performing love, mimicking what he thought a good husband should look like. We got married 2 years in. A small wedding, my idea. He didn't want to spend money on things that don't return value. I should have known then. Love, to him, was always transactional. I worked in event design, mostly weddings and high-end birthdays. I brought beauty into other people's lives while mine quietly dulled. He hated my job, said it was cute, but not serious. I stopped sharing my wins with him because he never clapped, only critiqued. Our home was his showpiece. I picked out the furniture, he chose the price tags. I filled it with warmth, he measured its value in equity. People thought we were happy, we looked perfect in photos, but behind every smile was a woman walking on emotional eggshells. He had a cruel sense of humor, the kind that hides behind phrases like, "I'm just joking," or "You're too sensitive." He made fun of my weight when I cried about bloating, laughed when I told him I wanted to go back to school. Every time I tried to grow, he made sure I remembered who held the scissors. Still, I stayed, because leaving felt too big, because he wasn't always awful, just enough to keep me guessing, just enough to make me question if maybe it was me, until that birthday. The one I'd planned to spend with champagne and slow dancing, the one he turned into a silent punishment I didn't understand. That was the day the spell cracked. The thing about emotional abuse is that it doesn't start as a storm. It starts as a drizzle, light enough to ignore, subtle enough to justify. And I justified a lot with Kevin. It began with him canceling plans last minute. Always work, always something important. I'd spend hours getting ready just to hear, "Let's reschedule." I stopped making plans, stopped hoping. I told myself it was part of being married to someone ambitious. He used to complain about the way I dressed. "You're not 20 anymore," he'd joke. "You don't need to show so much skin." Then, when I covered up, he'd say, "You used to try harder." No matter what I did, it was wrong. I started hiding purchases, even small ones. A dress from a clearance rack, a book I'd been dying to read, because I knew he'd say it was a waste of money, that I was impulsive. I began to shrink my world, so his wouldn't feel crowded. He rolled his eyes when I talked about my clients, called my work bougie nonsense. Once, he said, "People who spend 5 figures on flowers are the reason the world's broken." I laughed nervously, but it stung. I was good at my job. But with him, I felt like a fraud. He never forgot to praise other women, pretty waitresses, his coworker's wife who knew how to stay fit. I asked him once why he never complimented me. He shrugged and said, "You already know you're pretty. Do you need constant validation?" On our 5th anniversary, I planned a getaway, a cabin in the woods, just us. He canceled the night before, said his client needed him. I spent the weekend alone, drinking wine by a fire I built myself, pretending I wasn't heartbroken, I told my friends he was just busy, that meditating, journaling, and loving him harder would fix things, but no amount of soft would soften his edge. And then came the birthday. The night before, he kissed my cheek and said, "Big day tomorrow." I smiled. Hope bloomed again. Maybe this year he'd show up. Maybe this time would be different. It wasn't. The morning of my birthday, I woke up to silence. No breakfast smells, no music, no footsteps, just cold sheets and a sticky note on his pillow that said, "Don't wait up," like it was a joke, like my heartbreak was the punchline. I waited for hours, sat on the couch in the dress I'd picked out a week ago. Soft blush, just enough sparkle. I did my makeup, curled my hair, kept checking the door, like maybe he was hiding just around the corner with a surprise. He wasn't. At 2 p.m., I called him, straight to voicemail, texted him, "Where are you?" No reply. I watched the sun move across the floor tiles like it was mocking me. By 5, I stopped pretending, took off the dress, washed off the mascara, sat in my robe with the bottle of wine I'd bought for dinner, and drank it alone. I didn't cry at first, just stared into the glass like it might explain everything. At 8:15, my best friend called, asked how the dinner went. I paused, then lied, said it was lovely, said he'd made reservations somewhere fancy. I didn't want to say the truth out loud. It would make it too real. He came home the next morning around 6, loud, clumsy, laughing to himself like he'd just pulled the greatest prank on earth. When he saw my face, he said, "Babe, relax. It was a joke. I figured you'd spend the day pampering yourself. You love alone time, don't you?" I stood there in my kitchen, numb. "You left me alone on my birthday," I said. He blinked. And that one word, that smug little end, shattered me. Like all the little cracks over the years finally burst wide open. I said nothing, just walked past him, into the bedroom and shut the door, locked it. He knocked once, then gave up. By the time he left for work, I was already packing. Not suitcases, just my soul, mentally drawing the blueprints for an escape I hadn't dared to imagine before. That night, I booked a solo trip, 1 week, my first vacation alone. I didn't tell him I needed space. I needed to remember who I was without him narrating my every flaw. That trip changed everything. I didn't slam the door when I left. I didn't write a dramatic note or pack my things in front of him. I simply disappeared, quietly, intentionally. I booked a ticket to Santorini, packed a single suitcase, and left while he was at work. The silence was my goodbye. I turned off my phone the moment I boarded the plane. No updates, no explanations. Just me, the roar of the engine, and a heart finally starting to unclench. Somewhere over the Atlantic, I realized I hadn't breathed deeply. In years, when I landed, the sea air felt like freedom. I checked into a small boutique hotel with white walls, sunlit balconies, and sheets that smelled like lemon. I slept for 12 hours straight, then woke up and walked the streets like a woman reborn. I didn't cry, not even once. I didn't miss him. Not the sound of his voice, not the feel of his skin, not even the familiar weight of his absence. What I mourned was me, the version of me that had stayed so long, hoping he'd notice. On the 3rd day, I took a sunset cruise on a whim. Just me and a group of strangers, floating across a sea so blue it felt surreal. I watched couples kiss, families laugh, and for once I didn't feel envy. I felt space, the kind that lets you grow. That's where I met him, the man who would change everything. He wasn't flashy, just quiet, confident, kind. He noticed I was reading a book he loved and asked what I thought. We talked for hours, not about money or status or work, just life, dreams, the taste of the wine in our glasses. His name was Julian. I didn't know he was a billionaire then. He introduced himself like anyone else, wore linen shirts and scuffed boat shoes. He didn't need to impress me, and that was what impressed me most. He asked if I wanted to join his group for dinner. That night, I hesitated, then said yes. Something about his presence made my shoulders relax, like I didn't have to shrink myself to be liked. That dinner turned into coffee the next morning, then a walk, then another cruise. He never pushed, just listened, laughed, looked at me like I mattered, not because of what I gave, but because of who I was. And slowly, without even realizing it, I began to return to myself. After that week in Santorini, I didn't go back. Not to Kevin, not to our house, not to the version of me who waited for crumbs and called it love. I extended the trip, first by a few days, then indefinitely. I rented a small apartment overlooking the water and started freelancing remotely. Julian didn't try to take over my life. He didn't offer solutions or promises. He just stayed, nearby, available, present. He introduced me to his world slowly. The yacht wasn't a flex. It was a sanctuary, one he welcomed me into without conditions. He told me he built his company from nothing, that he knew what it was like to be overlooked, underestimated, used. There was no arrogance in his success, just quiet gratitude. I liked that about him. It made me feel safe. We started sailing together, just small trips at first. Islands, hidden beaches, sleepy towns with no cell service. I found myself laughing again, loud, unfiltered laughs. I wore bright colors, danced barefoot on the deck, cried at sunsets because they were too beautiful to hold inside. I didn't ask him for anything. Not money, not stability, not love, but he gave anyway, in ways Kevin never could. He watched me work, complimented my designs, connected me with clients who respected my art. He'd bring me coffee in the mornings and listen, really listen, when I talked about my dreams. Months passed. I got stronger, softer, whole. I started writing again, journaling the way I used to before I let someone else narrate my story. I stopped flinching when someone raised their voice, stopped apologizing for taking up space. One night, while anchored near the Amalfi Coast, he looked at me and said, you don't owe anyone an explanation for your glow up. You earned it. I think I fell in love with him a little more in that moment. He never asked about Kevin, but he knew. I told him eventually, not in one sitting, but in pieces. He never judged me, never asked why I stayed so long, just held my hand and said, "You left. That's what matters." And maybe that's true. Maybe healing doesn't come in one big moment. Maybe it's in the quiet mornings, the gentle laughter, the decision to sail forward even when the past calls you back. I didn't just rebuild, I transformed. It happened nearly a year later. I was back in the States for a friend's gallery opening, one of my first public appearances since leaving. I had a small collection on display. My name was on the wall. People were asking for me, my ideas, my process, my story. I wore a white suit that made me feel untouchable, hair pinned up, skin glowing from weeks under Mediterranean sun. I hadn't planned to see him there, but of course he showed up. Kevin always did love a room he didn't belong to. He spotted me near the drinks table, did a double take, then walked over like we were old friends. Like he hadn't abandoned me on my birthday and called it a joke. I felt nothing. Not anger, not fear, just stillness. "Wow," he said, eyes raking over me. "You look expensive." I smiled, slow and easy. "And you look exactly the same." That wiped the grin from his face. He asked where I'd been. I gave him nothing, just said I'd been around. He asked if I ever got the postcards he sent. I told him I didn't read mail from the past. He glanced at my ring. Not an engagement ring, just a bold sapphire Julian had given me after I told him blue made me feel powerful. Kevin stared at it like it owed him something. "Is he rich? Or something?" he asked, half laughing. I sipped my drink. "No," I said. "He's kind. That's rare." Kevin's smile faltered. "I miss us," he said. "Sometimes I think about what we could have been." I looked him dead in the eye. "You had me, and you chose to humiliate me. That's what we could have been." He tried to laugh it off, but his eyes couldn't hold mine. I turned, thanked him for coming, and walked away. He watched me go. I felt his stare like heat on my back, but I never looked back. I found Julian waiting outside. He had a coat over his arm, and that patient smile I loved. I leaned into him, and he kissed my temple, like I was made of gold. Kevin faded behind us like a story I no longer needed to carry. I used to think healing would feel like fireworks, loud, blazing, impossible to miss. But for me, it felt like this, waking up on a yacht with the ocean stretching out in every direction, a cup of coffee in my hand, and no one asking me to be smaller. It's been 2 years since I left. I've sailed through Greece, Spain, Thailand, Morocco. I've watched sunrises that made me cry and met women who carry entire universes in their voices. I've built a business that funds this. Life, one design at a time. No more crumbs, no more begging to be seen. Julian and I, we're happy. There's no label I cling to, just love that flows freely, respectfully, consistently. He doesn't rescue me. He rose beside me, and that's all I ever wanted. Sometimes I think about the girl I used to be, the one who waited at the window, on her birthday, dressed up for a man who never planned to show up. I want to hold her, tell her that silence isn't love. That being left behind doesn't mean you're unworthy. It means you're being redirected. Kevin hasn't changed. He still stalks my socials sometimes, leaves vague likes and little comments, but I don't engage. He lost access to this version of me the moment he chose a laugh over my heart. The greatest revenge isn't spite, it's indifference, it's peace, it's living a life so expansive that the person who hurt you shrinks inside it until they're barely a shadow. Don't need to curse him. Life already handled that. His world is made of games. Mine is made of truth, freedom, and deep blue water that knows my name. He left me alone on my birthday because he thought I was easy to forget, but I was never the one who'd be forgotten. The me joke was on him because I turned my heartbreak into a passport.